Does color really matter? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hi there, welcome to the Bass Fishing Life. I'm your host, Steve Rogers. Before we get started with the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click that notification bell. Thank you so much. Well, the other day I was browsing YouTube, which I do way too much of, and I found an interesting thumbnail, and the title to it said something along the lines of "Never use this color." Well, color is something that bass anglers are pretty passionate about, so naturally I clicked on it and watched this video, and it was done by a young man by the name of Nick Linder. I don't know Nick at all. I just happened to come across his video and watched it, and he was referring to an article that was published in March of 2018. The article is entitled "Seeing Red Vision in Largemouth Bass," and the link to it is down below in the description. If you Google search that title, it will pop right up, the first or second option that comes up. And I spent some time, not only did I watch his video, but I read through that article as well. And I'm going to go ahead and just try to put this down in small and condensed as I can for you. Basically what this article did, so some scientists wanted to do some studies on the vision of largemouth bass, not smallmouth, largemouth. They took some Florida strain bass and then some northern strain bass up from Illinois, I believe it said. And so they put them together, and then they started working on different colors within the spectrum and trying to figure out how bass react to those colors. They trained them for feeding purposes on certain colors, and their findings were pretty interesting. One thing that they talk about is that largemouth bass have diachromatic vision, okay? They have a color on each end of their spectrum. And the colors that they see the best, that are the most distinct for them, in other words, they can recognize them at a higher percentage rate than other colors. On one end you have red, and the other end you have green, okay? And their success rates with identifying those colors or reacting to those colors was pretty high. Now in the middle of that spectrum is where this article gets really interesting, and where Nick's title kind of lures you into learning more about it. In the middle of that spectrum, it says that largemouth bass have a very difficult time distinguishing between chartreuse and white. If you've fished for any length of time in the bass fishing world, you know that chartreuse is a big deal. But yet this finding from these scientists were saying that there's hardly any distinguishing difference. The bass really can't tell a difference between the white and a chartreuse. It looks, very similar to them. Well, that ties into kind of an accidental discovery that I had quite a few years ago. I was fishing a chartreuse and white spinnerbait, and I had gotten a backlash, or I was working on the reel, and I stuck the butt of the rod under my arm. I was working on the reel here, and then I had the rod out over the boat, and the lure was down in the water. And I'm working on my reel, and I look down, like, whoa. I know I had a chartreuse and white spinnerbait on, but in the water it was all white. I picked it up. It was chartreuse and white. I put it back down in the water. Now keep in mind, this was pretty stained to dirty water. And I dipped it back down in the water, and it turned back into various shades of white. Okay, so I'm thinking, well, it has to do with light penetration and then the reflecting properties of these colors, how much light gets bounced back to our eyes to what we're seeing. Well, that kind of ties into what this article had found. Now, I was working through some of the comments on here. Like I said, I had way too much time on my hands. And one of the comments up near the top was by a gentleman that claimed he was a fisheries biologist. And based on his answer, it would definitely seem that way. He seemed to have the proper vocabulary and sounded authoritative on the subject matter. And he went on to discuss that we need to think of like your chartreuse and whites and your black, blue, not so much as in two different colors, but as in contrasting versions of the same color. When I had put that spinnerbait down in the water, it looked all white in that dirty water, but it was various contrasting levels or intensity levels of white. Okay, this article also goes on to state that black blue is almost indistinguishable to bass, yet black blue is one of the most popular colors in the bass fishing world. But what this other scientist was saying is that we don't want to think about it as black and blue. The bass see mainly black, but there's different levels of contrast, almost like if you would say various shades of gray, okay? Well, that makes perfect sense. Think about the prey that bass are eating, whether it's bluegill, shad, whatever it might be. They're not one solid color pattern. They have depth to them. They have contrast. They have darker and lighter hues of the same color. If you pick up a crawfish in one of its many color forms or versions throughout the year, the red, brown, green, if you pick up a crawdad and look at it when it's in its brown stage, it's not one solid color of brown. There's many shades of brown in there. So that leads the question, and why are there so many colors? And I've got one of my crankbait boxes here. These are all Series 3 crankbaits, and as you can see, there's a huge variety of color in here, and everything from your reds to greens. I got lots of chartreuse in here, white, but this is pretty normal as far as color in the fishing world. So why is that the case? Well, there's a couple things going on here. One, we need to look at the marketing side of it. Okay, we know that the fishing industry is driven by sales. If we as consumers are not purchasing products, the manufacturers are not making money, they can't pump out new products, and the whole thing just kind of falls apart. Sales drive everything, much like it does in pretty much any industry. It's about sales. So manufacturers in the retail space need to fight for shelf space. Okay, if you started a lure company and you've got Joe Bob's Lure Company, whatever it may be, and you've only said, I'm going to focus on two colors, green pumpkin, black blue, most popular ones out there. If those are your only two offerings, your shelf space is going to be about that much. And consumers are going to walk right by it and not even notice your brand, your company, and your sales are going to be horrible. In the retail world, shelf space is referred to in 4-foot sections, okay? When I was a sales rep, you know, if I sold a 4-foot section of lures, that's great, but I wanted to sell 8-foot, okay? And one way to do that is through a wider variety of color choices. If a retailer offers 20 colors or 10 colors, whatever it might be, of the same lure, that's much more shelf space, and those products are more apt to get noticed by consumers. I'm sure you've been in some of the larger retailers, and some brands, they'll have 24, 28, 32 feet of crankbaits in a huge range of colors and models. Well, you're going to walk down that particular aisle, you're going to notice that brand. It drives sales. So that is the more practical reason for why we need color. But make no mistake, these companies want you to be successful on their products, which that is where their pro staff comes in. I've talked with many pro staff members over the years and product development teams, and there's a lot of time and effort that goes into a lure before it becomes ready for retail. And color is a big part of that, okay? These pro staffers work on color patterns that work in different water conditions in different parts of the country, and so it's real easy to get a wide spectrum of colors. But if you notice back here in this crankbait box, the one similarity between all of these is that you have contrast, but more in a sense intensity levels of color, okay? So this one right here is one of my favorites. It's Chartreuse Black Back. I've caught so many fish on a Chartreuse and Black Back crankbait. Well, let's think about this in regards to that article that we were talking about. That Chartreuse to a largemouth bass pretty much looks like white. Well, look at a fish. white belly, a darker back. Chartreuse black back really fits the bill of a prey fish or a bait fish type of a species. So that is why that is a great color combination. If you have, another good one is fire tiger. Okay, very popular. Now we know there's a lot of green in there, which according to this article, bass could distinguish, but there's some black in there, there's some chartreuse in there. So you have this wide depth of color and intensity of color, and that makes it look more natural. It's not just plain brown or plain green. It has different levels of intensity to that color. So once again, I just found this article very interesting. I thought that you might find it interesting as well. Does color really matter? We know that yes, it does matter, but the science behind that color is kind of interesting, especially now knowing and understanding that black and blue look very similar, okay, different levels of intensity of black to a largemouth bass, and chartreuse and white are different intensity levels of white to a bass. So that makes everything that we look at, puts it into a different mindset for us. So I hope that you found this informative. I know that I did. Make sure that you go out and encourage someone today, because you never know what a difference you're going to make in their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.